So I'm going to read the question out in a slightly different way. It says, how do we align the brain and emotions? So we have to make a distinction. Western psychology or Western physiology, including neuroscience, will tend to identify the brain with the mind. And this is always a controversial topic, because from a materialist point of view, the mind is the brain is the mind. Swami Vivekananda clears it up beautifully. He says it really doesn't matter which way you look at it. The mind is as material as the brain, the only difference between it being one of subtlety. So I would rather rephrase the question, how do we align the mind and emotions? Now, that's also a kind of contradictory question in the sense that part of the mind, part of the mental makeup, would be emotions that come and go. We can imagine the mind as a kind of area or a field that we can observe. And the fact that we can observe it means that I'm not the thing which is being observed, I'm the observer. And of course, what is egoism? Egoism, according to Patanjali, was the mix-up. The seer identifying with what is being seen, namely body and mind, and all the environment that surrounds that. Because we form a relationship with the world. So the brain is just a kind of a conduit, a bit like a light bulb, and there's an electrical current behind it that is vastly more than the limitations of the light bulb. And so we're left with what we philosophically call upadhis. Upadhis means adapters. Well, that's my interpretation of it, my English translation of it. But in texts, you'll find it is labeled as limiting adjuncts, something that is close, something that is proximate to that which is behind and vaster. So the example of the light bulb is the light bulb itself is an adapter displaying heat and light, radiating, that characteristic is there, but there has to be something that connects to it. You know yourself, you have to have a switch. And when the switch is on, it means that the light bulb is connected to the current. When the light bulb of the mind, as it were, is connected to the current, which sits behind it. Now, from the Eastern psychology point of view, that current is actually called chitta to some extent. It is a kind of mind stuff. It is a kind of energy drawn in, vortexed as it were, in seemingly an individual way and used by a user. And then the user, of course, is the one which operates it, ideally with self-mastery. Now, yesterday I had to postpone a talk, and I said maybe I'll pick the theme up today. And the talk was self-mastery. And the assumption is that we are not necessarily masters of our destiny. We're not necessarily masters of our circumstances, not masters of our physiology, not masters of our mentality, not masters of our emotions contained within it, not masters of our decisions. But all of this really is not correct. Because if that were the case, then the brain, for example, would determine that we are correct in a certain belief or a certain understanding. And we have to believe a mechanism called the brain. And then where does that belief come from? It comes from the brain. Now you're into a circularity. So how do you overcome this circularity? Some independent onlooker must be there. And this is the whole thrust of the Vedas, really. This is the whole thrust of the Upanishads, centered around the existence of an Atman. With this question, who am I? And when you analyze it as what is the final knower of what is going on, the knower of the fields in front, the language of the Bhagavad Gita, the 13th chapter. What is the knower of the field? Who is the knower of the field? That question is addressed. And Krishna, standing as that universal consciousness, says know me to be the knower in all the fields, that is, all the minds and all coordinated and co-opted instruments which we have. That is why, as I pointed out many times before, the mind, what we call the mind, is really more accurately termed an internal instrument. Antakarana, the body is an external instrument. And so the mind is just a subtle version, a finer version of that. And when we try to find out who am I now have to go through the various layers from the thickest to the more subtle, mind itself. And so it goes on a progressive inward journey until ultimately we find that beyond which we cannot go any further, and that is a matter of discovery. So emotions are there within the psyche, and sometimes there are things that we have to do and we are fearful of doing it. That requires, firstly, an evaluation about the possibilities. And as I have said many times, if we had a contest between rationale, reasoning, intellect, and emotions, such as doubt and fear and temptation, the emotions will always drive us in that direction. Emotions are hugely powerful. They obliterate any sense of reasoning. And so naturally, we have to call a halt to it temporarily and say, wait, let's have a temporary truce. Let us see if there is a way of bringing in some rationale. Now, this is used widely in psychology. When you understand what is the basis of your fear, the fear itself can go away. And this extends to phobias as well. Once you introduce the item or the object or objective which is causing some element of fear within you, but you see our language, we take an external object and say, this is causing fear in me. No, the fear in you is deep down in your psyche, in a matter of various associations, various memories that will come up and rule the day. And if they're of an emotional variety, then these, unless checked, these will rule the day. And therefore, in those circumstances, we are no longer master. We are now slaves, slaves of our internal emotions, slaves of our responses. All of these things are there. So there are some things which initially we have to push ourselves through. There's a book called, I think it's entitled Face the Fear and Do It Anyway, something along those lines anyway. But there are circumstances where, without even thinking, we overcome what could be a fearful situation if we were paused and pondered over it. For example, somebody trapped under a car. There is on record of people who have accessed superhuman strength to save a life, to get a person out. More so, mothers with children, etc. And this is not just for humans, this is there in the animal kingdom also, where mothers decide, as it were. I say as it were because it's a non sequitur. It happens by itself. There is no thought about it. It just happens. Instinctively, if you will. But what is instinct? Instinct is that built up, learned behavior that provides us with a spontaneous response. And afterwards we can think about it. Let's take, for example, people who are in dangerous situations, in dangerous occupations. Let us say, for example, mining. Mining is the least insured of all professions. And the reason for that is it's highly risky. A rock may fall, it may injure you, it may hurt you, it may even kill you. You can have many, many accidents on various mines. And so these are very dangerous, not to mention various gases that come up from coal mines and from unventilated areas, or you can die from gas from explosions. You can be caught in an explosion. There are many, many things in mining that will be dangerous. And yet people do it Now, supposing you find miners that are trapped, there are many cases like that, then people spontaneously react. They try to save a life instantly. And then there are the thoughtful people, the rescuers, that have a certain rehearsed protocol where they go in and they rescue people. And those people, of course, these are heroes. But the person who reacts spontaneously are also acting in a heroic way. What does heroism mean? It means putting aside your fears, either naturally or rationalized way, and doing it for a greater good. Risking your own life for others is a great example of heroism, and taking your life and offering it. This is why Margaret Elizabeth Noble was called Nivedita, dedicated one, because she was dedicated. She sacrificed her whole life, consisting of body, mind, family circumstances. Her whole education was orientated around doing the best and the upliftment culturally, politically, socially for India and India's people. And that is why at a mere 44 years of age, she was completely spent, having offered her life up. We tend to offer our lives up also as a living sacrifice. That's the meaning of the Geruva cloth in monastic life as well. Well, in monastic life, in terms of Buddhism, in terms of Hinduism, this is the concept. You sacrifice your life for others. Now you see in the military field, you'll find many, many heroic deeds. And we're not examining the motivation for it. Simply to say something is important enough to sacrifice your own life, to lead from the front, whatever opinion you may have of Napoleon as a person. There is no doubt, there's wide agreement that he was a military genius, a person who made many mistakes, no doubt, but he led from the front, unlike the habit in the old days that generals don't lead at all. They stand at the back and survey the battlefield and call advance and retreat and so on and so forth. He's leading from the front. You'll see this kind of heroism in World War I as well, where people have to go over a trench and run toward the enemy. And in doing that, this is the officers only armed with a pistol. It looks like a very unprepared leader, because what will you do with a pistol and other people have a rifle or even machine guns, and you're going over the top, as it were, leading your men. Leadership by example. Now, can we ourselves be heroic in our own way? Yes. First of all, adhering to truth. Adhering to truth in the face of opposition, in the face of maybe the majority of opinions. We see many areas like this in the realm of science, for example, where revolutionary ideas are thwarted or even ridiculed by mainstream thought. And today it's very complicated because it means that science is financed, the finance comes into research, the research is around certain things which are deemed to be acceptable, many papers are written, and so there is a vicious cycle of financing research, which is research along traditional, conventional lines, with no breakthrough in original thought. What is assumed to be original thought is just an original theory, and faced with a problem, none of these have worked for the last 40, 50 years. There have been no real major breakthroughs in the world of physics, for example, in the last 40, 50 years. Physics and biology are the fundamental sciences that are attempting to answer the questions of why and how. At a fundamental level where science meets philosophy. And philosophy is the other means, and by philosophy we mean understanding the principles and then carrying out the practices. So what makes you attempt a thing? There can be various reasons why you would go and attempt something that is fearful. And the main reason is the value is higher than the fear. Simple as that. And if you take an example where you're debating, can I do this, can I not do this? Well, a practical thing that you can do is write a list. In other words, bring the fear into the rationale, because it's the rationale that will overcome the fear, but fear is more spontaneous. Fear, you'll feel it in the gut, perhaps. And when you rationalize it and put it down in terms of, for example, the time it might take, do I have the time allocation to do what I need to do? What is the merit? How will I organize my life in order to do this? In other words, is it practically feasible? And once you start introducing that, the fear starts melting away. But there's a more philosophical, deeper, broad-based understanding of how to manage fear. I've dealt with this in other talks, and that is to understand the unity of existence. If you say divine grace is flowing, divine grace is flowing, divine grace is flowing, without understanding it fully or meaning it or being connected with it, it will be ineffective. It has to be something that is felt deeply. The ancient Vedas, which are not well read, if you ask the average Hindu, for example, whether you have read the Vedas, most of them have read nothing at all, only a few prayers that they know from the Vedas, and don't necessarily understand, because there were 25% of the Rig Veda, the prayers and hymns are dedicated to praise of Indra, but Indra who prays to Indra anymore. And by Indra, we're not talking about the mythological usurpation of Indra's status. We're talking about an entity that had some meaning in the ancient days. And one thing we observe is the careful observation, sense of awe and wonder for all the forces of nature. So it is a wonderful thing to take, for example, the breath and see how is the breath connected in any way to the other forces of nature, to the wind blowing. How is it connected with the directions that are seen to be forces, governing forces? We call these pranas. Points of energy expression where one controls the speech, one controls the circulation, one controls elimination and digestion, one controls the breathing, one controls the downward expression of it, upward expression of it, equalizing aspect of it, and so on. There are 5 pranas, 5 versions of this energy, but it boils down to only one energy. Now, when we boil everything down to one thing, all that fear will go away. Do you have an example for that? Yes. Don't forget, we have 3 states of consciousness. And these 3 states of consciousness are expressed in the opening sounds, if you will, or symbols, sound symbols, of 3 worlds. 7 worlds being available if we list the whole thing. Each increasing in subtlety. Let us take the ones that are most familiar to you. Bhu, Bhuva, Swaha. These 3 things. Bhu means this waking world, this waking experience. That's one state of consciousness. Bhuva, the dream consciousness, and Swaha, the dreamless sleep state consciousness, where there is no desire, no fear, no strategy, no rationale either, but no emotion, because there are no 2. We find really the basis of the absence of fear from going to this point of unity in reality, in actuality. And that truly only happens in its most profound way in meditation. So meditation is the necessary practice for everyone. And Swami Purnananda will have this to say about the whole thing in answer to his own question. How can I control the restless mind? Because that is what we are dealing with. A fear arises and creates a turbulence, creates a nagging feeling within us that translates into the physical. We will feel it physically. Fear is felt physically. If it wasn't felt physically, then we wouldn't have the instinct to defend ourselves in a difficult situation. Every animal knows that there has to be some mechanism that stimulates adrenaline, an extraversion of energy where we can fight or flee or yield or whatever it is. There's some natural response to an awkward situation that involves your life. And naturally, you'll defend it. When somebody threatens to strike you, the instantaneous human reaction is to put a defense up. Or even to run away. But you can't think that I sat down, I weighed it up carefully, I wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I decided what course of action I should do. No, it's much quicker than that, much more spontaneous than that. The flight and confront instinct in us is biologically entrenched for self-preservation. And so it comes down to the mind. And only humans have the capacity to exercise the control lever called attention that is able to control the restless mind, keep it calm, or at least direct it in a certain way. And directing itself will calm the mind, make a kind of antidote within the mental field. Now, Swami Purnananda answers this question. He says, practice japam and meditation regularly. Now, that's a very simple formula, but in the midst, sometimes there's a circular reaction to things whereby we feel unsettled, feel fearful, and cannot sit down for japam and meditation. Who says you have to sit down, though, for japam? Repeating your mantra continuously with meaning, with feeling, mitigates against any kind of fear. And then part of your mantra will be this indication of oneness. There's only one thing which is there. We have to be persuaded. The mind has to be persuaded with its background of divisiveness, a kind of fragmentation as a point of view that the mind has that is necessary for this fight or flight mode that all biological species must have in order to survive, but on the basis of what? On the basis that I am existent. I'm always existent. I'm existent now, and I'll always be existent. Now, this lesson is taught early on in the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, because fear is there. Fear is there, guilt is there in Arjuna, a trembling, a grief, in an awkward situation. He cannot get even as dramatic as the situation that Arjuna finds himself in. None of us have had to face what he had to face. And what does he do in the midst of that? He resorts to a more profound, a wiser authority. He relies on Krishna as his teacher. In other words, this is our first way of handling things. First way of handling is seek some being who is wiser than you. And a being in this sense is, it could be a thing, for example, such as scripture, be well versed in it. And it could be resorting to your own inner wisdom, which will provide you with the rationale for it. or it could be physically a teacher. This question is directed at the teacher, namely Swami Purnananda, and he's replying. So japam, the repetition of your protecting thought, your mantra, steers the mind continuously, keeps it in the presence of the divine. And don't be alarmed if fear takes over again. Fear will come, desire will come, doubt will come, many things will come. Allow them to come, but don't allow them to stay. And this is how we exercise our self-mastery. It requires practice like every other craft, like painting, like music, like mathematics, like any art or science. It requires practice. 3 things are required for this. The first thing is this practice. The second thing is practice, and the third thing is practice. And he says regularly, and meditation, sitting down, or whenever the urge arises. You see, you have to sit down. Typically, you're instructed morning and evening. Well, some people can only manage the morning. That's okay. Morning is better than not doing at all. But regularly, if same time every day, that's how it should be practiced. And that's not restricted to that. Supposing you are walking in a park, or supposing there's some beautiful idea occurs to you, and the inclination, the urge is to sit down and connect with this highest spiritual dimension within you, then you do it, of course. But regularly means this, because he carries on. Don't miss a single day. Don't miss a single day. Now I'll add something else to it, and that is this. Whatever problem we may be facing, we can introduce it into our meditation, since it may well come by itself anyway. Since our mind is preoccupied with the thing, don't push it down, bring it out, and view it as an object for meditation. Now, to do that properly, we'll have to make it meditation, we'll have to take it to its deepest origin. There we find what religion calls God, or the highest and deepest self of the entire universe, the Atman itself, the Brahman. If we take it down to that level, because what is all this that we call the world, that we call the waking state and dream and all the items within it, all of this is manifested from a single source, looking like different things. We have to be absolutely persuaded by that. And the experience of meditation will give us this persuasiveness, plus scripture, which endorses the message, the principles, time and time and time and time again, teacher that endorses it time and time again, and so on. And any inspiring thing that will take the mind to the highest. So the mind, he says, is like a restless boy. He continually runs around. You must bring the mind under control again and again. Nobody has as much energy as a 5 or 6 year old child, running around, probably playing football or running or chasing, but always continuously active. An adult will be hard pressed to keep up with him. He says you must bring the mind under control again and again, and engage it in meditation on, and he's very specific, the chosen deity for most people. Now there's a reason why it is a chosen deity, because it suits you emotionally, it suits you psychologically, it suits you in every way. That being selected, that has to be resorted to, so that you are never alone. And any decision that is being made is a joint decision. What should I do? And the Vedas give us such a great insight into these various aspects of a devotee. So a fatherly aspect is brought out in various prayers. A motherly aspect is brought out in various prayers. Why? Because the father is a provider, The Father provides, the Father protects. So when we feel we need to be provided for, and when we feel we need to be protected, this fatherly aspect comes out. Then, if we are to be nourished and understood, the motherly aspect comes out, which also has an aspect of protection, prosperity, and so on. Whatever chosen deity suits you is a divinely inspired point or port of call that we can use all the time. He says, if you struggle, if you continue this struggle, and he's actually putting a time period on it, for 2 or 3 years, the mind will gradually, not all of a sudden, be calm, and you'll feel an unspeakable bliss in your heart. And absolutely, that is so. You'll know it yourself. In moments like that, even temporary moments, you will see that bliss in your heart. Of course, in the beginning, these practices, japa, meditation, they seem a little dry because we are used to the audio-visual kinesthetic world in which we live. And that's only because we misunderstand meditation, we misunderstand its technique, its practice, and we miss, therefore, the benefits. But you must engage the mind forcibly in contemplation of the chosen deity. It's like swallowing a bitter medicine to get rid of a fever. And slowly spiritual joy will flow within you. He says people work so hard to pass examinations, but God realization is far easier. One should call on God sincerely with a serene mind. Now, all of this is practical, no doubt, but it's not saying that it is hugely easy. For example, what happens if somebody insults you? There's a very good example of how the mind gets out of control. But you see, in the Bhagavatam, Krishna tells his disciple Uddhava a beautiful, beautiful story. And he asks, please listen with attention. He says, once a mendicant who was maltreated by the wicked, but who bore it with patience, considering it as but the effect of his own past deeds. So he tells the story like this. There lived in Avanti a Brahmana who was immensely rich, but who led a miserable life doing business and was greatly avaricious and exceedingly irritable. He never greeted his relatives or guests with kind words. Even, and living in that God-forsaken house, he never gave even his own body occasional comforts. And as he led such an impious and despicable life, his sons and relatives didn't like him, and his wife, daughters, and servants were sad and didn't act up to his wishes. And as he took pleasure only in hoarding money and never cared for the acquisition of virtue or the legitimate satisfaction of desires, he lost both his life and the next, and the 5 sharers of his wealth were wroth. What are the 5 sharers traditionally? These are the deities, the seers, the supernatural beings, the men, animals. All of these are entitled to daily offerings in Hindu daily spiritual cultural life. Then he says, through his disregard of them, his stock of merits, that is his all the portion that had contributed to his wealth, built up by past merits, was exhausted, and that wealth too, which he was at such pains to accumulate, also vanished. And some of that wretched Brahmana's wealth was taken by his relatives and some by robbers, and some part was destroyed by accident or worn out through the lapse of time, and some of it was taken by men or kings. And when his wealth was thus gone, he was ignored by his own people. He was exceedingly anxious about his future, for he had neglected the acquisition of virtue or the legitimate satisfaction of desires. He was penniless, in dire extremities, and as he was reflecting long on his condition, his voice choked with repentance. He was seized with a tremendous disgust for the world, and he said to himself, "Woe, alas, unto me! I have for nothing tormented the body in this mad quest for riches, neglecting the acquisition of virtue and the legitimate satisfaction of desires. Riches seldom bring happiness to the despicable man. They only cause the mortification of his body while he is alive and pave the way for hell after he is dead, because of the misuse of wealth. Even a modicum of greed is enough to destroy the untarnished reputation of a renowned man. And the most praiseworthy attributes of a virtuous man, as leucoderma, spoils the most graceful features, and whether in the acquisition of wealth or after it he has been acquired, in the increase, maintenance, expenditure, enjoyment, or loss of it, men undergo exertion, fear, anxiety, and delusion. Theft, injury to others, falsehood, ostentation, lust, anger, pride, haughtiness, dissension, enmity, distrust, competition, and the three kinds of indulgence relating to human relations, perpetuation of the species, drinking, intoxicating liquid, gambling, such things as that. These 15 evils pertaining to man are considered to be the outcome of greed. Therefore, one desirous of well-being should shun from a distance the evil known as wealth. Now, brothers, wives, fathers, and friends, who were very near and dear to the heart, are all instantly alienated and turned into enemies by even an insignificant fall in circumstances. And so it goes on. So the story goes on a lot, but it tells us one thing. It tells us that the emotions without virtue and the resources that we have without using them appropriately and without actually attending to our legitimate desires, upset the mind and overwhelm us and bring us misfortune. So therefore it behoves us to learn self-mastery. This is in the context of self-mastery. And self-mastery means I'm master of the physical, I'm master of the mental, I'm master of the emotional, the intellectual, I'm master of my spiritual life that gives me bliss. Now, I put that in an order from the outside to the inside, but the inside is more foundational. So I have to cultivate bliss first. And by cultivating bliss, I'm taking care of all the other things. Where will I get this bliss from? I'll get this bliss by understanding there is only one unity of existence that expresses itself in varying ways to suit me. And if I can catch that, Ramakrishna described it as the wind of divine grace is always blowing. We but have to set the sail. And that means we have to relax. But we also have to be practical enough to introduce the intellect in a masterly way. Some practical examples. If I have a situation, then I can write down the benefits. Let's say I have two alternate situations. I can write down on a piece of paper. You know, the art of writing is almost lost with computer technology and so on. So I have taken great delight in taking a pen and writing carefully, nicely, artistically, so another can read it, not hastily, doing it in a kind of calligraphy way. Now, I don't have the best handwriting, but still, when I write, I delight in the flow of the pen and everything, and writing down the pluses and minuses of any individual circumstance so that I can make an informed decision. And as soon as I put this down, why on a piece of paper, why in writing, so that I can see it, so that it is in front of me. And then I can see what is the best course of action and how will I manage it. Invariably, it requires time management, organization, and that all requires planning. And planning requires not just overall planning, Overall planning to start with, but detailed planning in the end. And then see, is this manageable? Is this feasible? How can I do it in a practical way? What supports will I require? And an informed decision can be made. But the basis of fearlessness is the same basis as heroism. And that is, there are no two. This has to be my absolute conviction. What is spiritual life? Why should we do japa and meditation? It has come to this one conclusion, that there is only one blissful state. It is here, it is now, it is within me, it's outside, it never leaves. And when I rehearse that, how will you rehearse it? Meditation, says Swami Purnananda, regularly done at the same time, daily. And then in my waking life, I have to have that same outlook. I have to see and feel this unity of existence behind all the fragmentation, like looking at a picture instead of looking at the individual pixels. Then I stand back and I'm able to see the overall totality. Oh, totality, thank you for standing there. Oh, great totality, now I see. It is my left hand and my right hand are two parts of the same entity. The other person's left hand is part and parcel of this. And the Vedas will put it in many different ways. Purusha Suktam, very famous passage in the Vedas, will tell us that 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, using that language. This is picked up by later literature. It's picked up by the Bhagavad Gita. It's picked up and emphasized in a generalized way by the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, that every eye is the divine eye, every hand is the divine hand, every head is the divine head. How is it that we don't notice it? It's because we're putting ourselves in the field where we see things as opposition instead of seeing it as different factions of the same thing. Now, every week now, well, I have been doing it last week anyway. You see how this works in actual practical life. How we see, and I'm not shy to repeat my famous drawing. Oh, it's here already. I don't have to draw anything, it's already here. So we see that this is our normal life. We distribute it into what I say is me and other things. But actually, when I stand here, when I sit on God's throne and beam where He beams, then I'll see all of this is manifested from that. And all of this dream is manifest from that. And all of this waking state, dream sleep, is manifested from that. And I have another option, and that is this. And this is meditation, where I take all these memories and allow them to re-emerge. And I then put them into the divine organizational structure. I lead it, let it lead me, or the mind, toward this central I, this central being. This central being is my own being. I am the universe. This we have to rehearse daily. In meditation, we always do it. In meditation, we always bring our attention down, back, as it were, to that one without a second, where there can be no fear because there is no duality. There's no second. Now I have to rehearse it. I can't do that for you. You can do it. You alone can do it. Let us take, for example, in observing various beautiful things in what we call nature. I think the Vedas are pretty much misunderstood. And I'll give you a sample of the beauty that should be ours to behold. You know, there's that famous line, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, get it out with objects. No? So anyway, We have one particular passage. Aga Yoseva Sunari Ushayati Prabhujantati Jarayanti Rajanam Padvadiyati Ut Pattayati Pakshinaha. So, like a noble lady, it's Aga to come, like a capable lady, Yosha Iva Shunari. Like a noble lady, Usha comes, carefully tending everything. Rousing all life, she stirs creatures that have feet and makes the birds fly up. Now, this is beautiful poetry, but what does it mean? Creation is characterized by time, whose best measure is through the movement of the sun, and our observation is sunrise and sunset. Every time we witness a sunrise and a sunset, ever more beautiful when the temperature is a little bit warmer. The springtime sunrise and sunset, for example. And we can use our artistic creative imagination. The Usha, in these Vedic times, has been described as something like mother sun and also the elder sister of the night. That's how the Vedas will view it. The authors of the Vedas will view it. The seers will view it. She's also the goddess whose coming and going are the daily markers in life, giving us a sense of, we know where we are in terms of time. And on her arrival, she goads all to activity. Come on, be active, get up, do something. And in the process, she also makes everyone go towards the ultimate disintegration that we call nightfall. If you have a poet's eye, you'll see it. Now, how does this goddess Usha manage all of this? Knowing that this Usha is actually the manifestation of that one, but given to us as a gift, where we can see the beauty of time and nature and our relationship to it. So, how does she manage all of this? She manages it like a noble lady of the house who takes care of everybody. The mother of the house, the mistress of the house, is taking care of everybody, looking after this, looking after that, looking after guests, looking after the care of the household. And she tends to everything. And at other places, she's also seen variously as a mother and also, more interestingly, as a bride. In this great mantra, Usha is described as the mother who takes care of the whole world. Now, all of this beauty misses it, or misses us, if we simply dismiss it, or even miss it altogether. The sun rose this morning, so what? The sun set this evening, so what? And the sun sets so late now here in Ireland anyway, and rises so early and continues to do so, where we are moving toward the longest days and the longer days of summer. But you see, if we don't fill our heads and our sentiments and our hearts with these observations and see the inner beauty of everything, then we'll be fixed into our small world here and end up standing here and asking, how do we get out of here and how do we deal with here? And how can we control this area, mischaracterized as brain? And the answer is we cannot. We have to stand in a different place. We have to observe all these are rays, manifestations of divine grace and glory that we can notice in particular ways and give ourselves within, allow this beautiful insight to come, this beautiful interpretation of a mere sunrise, a sunset, and bring some artistic, creative poetry to it. See things in a beautiful way. After all, nature is beautiful. We shouldn't see it in any other way. So these are all just a few suggestions and comments about your two questions. You see, there's a technique in psychology. It is called timeline therapy. It's been described as timeline therapy. It says, okay, so you have some kind of, this is used in the case of traumatic memories or a fear. You say, all right. So now imagine that there's a line going across the head, either horizontally from left to right or from back to front. If it's at the back, then that represents the past. The front represents the future. And in the middle is now. Left represents the past if you do it horizontally across the head. And the right represents the future. But where I am in the middle is now. Now, if you take yourself toward the past on a timeline, going back, let's say, to the age of 4, and the age of 12, and so on and so forth, you trace a traumatic event, and then see the people and circumstances around that event. What was the cause? Because you're too young to know or to judge. You're just part and parcel of the effect experience. And then you ask, okay, so from your adult perspective, that is here and now, can you please tell me what was the cause of this? How would you look at it from the adult perspective? And as soon as you do that, you have a sense of understanding, intellectual understanding, that immediately mitigates against the fearful circumstance. It goes away, disappears. As soon as we put in some rationale, some part of the head going in, we find the fear goes away because we've now understood it. Fear is basically fear of the unknown. Once it's known, there's no longer any fear. And then along with that, we put in this deep spiritual practice because this is in the realm of the psyche, intellect and emotions. Go deeper and see. There is ultimately an executive officer sitting there, and that executive officer is witnessing all of these things going on, and then accessing that gives us the bliss of unity and peace where there's no fear. No fear can ever reside there. When we see it everywhere, we become absolutely fearless. Being absolutely fearless has the effect of being courageous, and being courageous gives us the effect of being a hero or heroine. That's it. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swami.
Good.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.